So, welcome everybody. My name is Brittany. I work for Detroit Bird Alliance, and this is a partner webinar with Michigan State University. And our panelist and presenter today is Lindsey Kerr, and we will be presenting the Winterizing Your Garden webinar. So, we're excited to have you, and feel free to go ahead and get started, Lindsey.
Great. Thank you so much, Brittany. I am excited to be here. So yeah, well, people are taking that poll. It does really feel like summer right now. I am sitting here in my home and I'm sweating. But it's time to start talking about winterizing your garden, and getting ready for the fall, and the colder months. And in doing so, hopefully we can create more hospitable gardens for wildlife, birds, insects, mammals, things like that. So let's see. Looks like we've got about 75% of people having participated, so I'm going to end the poll. So thank you everybody for doing that, and I'm not going to share the results. So we're good to go. Let's see. Okay, so I always have to read this slide as well. MSU is an affirmative action, equal opportunity employer. Michigan State University extension programs and materials are open to all without regard to race, color, national origin, sex, gender, gender identity, religion, age, height, weight, disability, political beliefs, sexual orientation, marital status, family status, or veteran status. So again, thank you for doing that survey because it shows that we are meeting these requirements. So I want to do this presentation today because I really want people to understand that we don't garden in a vacuum. We are all interconnected. The air and the soil is all connected. So this is actually a picture from my backyard, and you can see how close I am to my neighbors and how that, birds, insects, things like that, pollutants, they just move between our yards. There really are no boundaries. Sometimes we think of fences, we think of the end of our property, but nature doesn't think of boundaries. It doesn't care about property lines or political lines, things like that. So everything is interconnected. And as we garden or as we bird, it's really important for us to think about that. So tonight we're going to think about some changes that we can make that support birds, not only so they visit your yard more often, but so they can simply exist in these new to them environments. So many birds pass through our gardens on their way to breeding or wintering grounds, and we often don't see them. They're just passing through. They come through at night, or when we're at work. But they can all benefit from small changes that we can make. This is actually my front yard. This is a silver maple. And this spring I was sitting at my desk, and I'm actually sitting at the same desk right now. And I heard a hermit thrush, and I was so excited because I'm in this very tight-knit little neighborhood. You can see from this picture, there's not a lot of habitat around. It is mostly lawn. And so a hermit thrush found my tree. It was maybe just taking a break as it was moving on, to better habitat. But it found my tree, it found my little native plant garden in the front yard, where I have a water source as well. And it just rested maybe for a day and moved on, but it made me really happy. And so I want to encourage people to make these small changes so that they can also bring more wildlife into their yards. And tonight I'm going to talk a lot about native plants, but I want people to understand that I'm not a purist, and I love the saying, don't let perfection be the enemy of good. So we're just doing our best. And if we can make one small change, it can make a difference, across the board when we all change together. So cleaning up the fall garden. So why do we clean up? So the main reasons why I think are diseases, weeds, and smothering. And I'm going to go into more detail about this. And then the what are infected plants, seeds, creeping plants, and excessive leaves. So one reason that you don't see listed here is cleaning up because you're worried about what your neighbors will think. I don't know that that's the best reason. I've heard it a lot. People clean up because they're worried about their neighbors and social pressure. Um, so I kind of discourage you to, or maybe I should say, I encourage you to move away from worrying about your neighbors and garden for yourself and garden for native wildlife. So we'll go into more detail about this. And one thing I would also encourage people is right now to start thinking about removing invasive shrubs. And I'll go into more detail about this. But invasive shrubs right now, they're easy to identify and they are junk food for birds. So if you love birds, it's the time to get rid of them. The berries that are on these plants are attractive, just like junk food, but they don't provide the right nutrients for birds as they migrate. And so I highly encourage you to remove them. Okay, so I talked about disease, cleaning up to get rid of disease. So this is an example of a diseased peony. I actually cut these down yesterday in my own yard. So diseased peonies should be disposed of in city compost, or if you have a larger property in a brush or a compost pile that's far from your garden beds. You don't want to leave diseased leaves like this in your garden. You also don't want to compost them in your yard and then reapply the spores from this fungus into your garden bed next season. So when you see something like this, you want to remove it. This is the backside of those leaves. So you can see the spores from the fungus right there on the leaves. So right now I highly encourage you to clean up your peonies. And like I said, remove them. Put them in the city compost if you have it. If you don't have city compost, putting it far away on your property. This is downy mildew on cucumbers. This is in my backyard. Again, clean this up. Don't leave it sitting there all winter long, thinking that this would provide cover for birds, right? But really we want to get rid of this disease from the garden. We don't want anything like this to overwinter and reinfect our plants next year. So you want to take all of this down and dispose of it. Try and get it out of your yard if that's possible. Also remove any rotten tomatoes, any potatoes. Make sure you're getting as many out of the ground as you can. Don't let potatoes overwinter because they harbor blight, and that potato blight, which is the infamous blight that caused the Irish potato famine, also affects tomatoes and other things in the Solanaceae family. So cleaning up your vegetable garden in particular at the end of the season is really important. So I mentioned invasive species. Now I'm going to jump back to more like shrubs and things like that. Now is the time to remove invasive species. But the first step is you want to identify them. So you can use an app if you're not familiar with them. There are a lot of plant ID apps. They're pretty good. I would probably use at least 2 to try and identify something to make sure that they match up. But you can also use Ask Extension. I might put that in the chat, but Ask Extension is an online tool that you can use through Michigan State University. You can just Google Ask Extension and it'll pop up. But you can send in pictures and your question and somebody will identify the plant for you. Speaking of disease though, if you knew, like right now, if you know one of your plants is diseased, say tomatoes, and you're wondering what to do about it, you can send in pictures to Ask Extension and we'll try and identify that disease for you and make recommendations so that it doesn't come back next year if that's possible. Correctly identifying diseases is really important. We don't want people just applying pesticides without properly identifying the cause first, because oftentimes cultural practices, nutrient deficiencies, things like that can look like a disease caused by a pest. But if you're applying a pesticide, an insecticide, when really your problem is a nutrient deficiency, that's a waste of an insecticide and it's damaging the environment. On the other hand, if you're applying fertilizer when you actually have something else going on, again, that's not good either. And we really don't want excess fertilizer going into our water. So it's always important to figure out what the cause is before you try and treat something. So Ask Extension is a great resource. It's free. And we do our best to keep on top of those questions. I'm answering them daily right now. Okay. So again, going back to identification, you want to make sure that you're removing the right plant and using the right technique. So cutting down a lot of these invasive species isn't enough, and it won't kill them if you just cut it down and leave it. Oftentimes you need to dig out the crown or the stump, and sometimes you need to get rid of the roots. So identification will help you with that. I'm not going to go into great detail about that, about removal. That's a different topic for another time, but just be aware of that. If you can't remove trees and shrubs right now, label them so that you can do it later. You're looking at these red berries. This is an invasive honeysuckle. This was right at the parking lot for my office. I didn't even have to walk off the parking lot and I could see it. So it's very visible right now. But, come spring or in the middle of winter when I have time, if I was going to remove this, I might not be able to identify it. So maybe you take a piece of tape and there's marking tape. It's like a really stretchy plastic tape that you can buy in really visible colors. And you could tie that around a branch to flag it and let you be able to see it in, say, January. You could also use paint like they do in the city, put an X on it or something like that if it's big enough. So, if you can, try starting to remove these plants now, partly because we don't want these seeds hitting the ground. And these berries are just so attractive to birds. And again, they're just junk food for birds. MSU did a study about 10 years ago. A graduate student did it looking at, in particular, catbirds. And they found that when catbirds fed in areas with a high number of invasive species like honeysuckle or lonicera, they lost mass. So they're actually losing weight by eating these berries. And of course, that's not good when we need birds to overwinter or migrate. This is also a honeysuckle. I just wanted to show you the immature berries. So you can see that they can be bright red, or that right now on this one, which is just a few feet away, it's a different color. I think they'll turn a little bit brighter red in a little bit. And these are the flowers. Generally they bloom earlier in the spring, maybe because of drought stress. This one was blooming right now. It's a lovely plant. They're old-fashioned. I grew up with them. They're extremely invasive and they're listed in Michigan, so we really do need to remove them. Calorie pear is not listed in Michigan. It's listed in Ohio. It's taking over Southeast Michigan right now. It is not technically invasive in Michigan because the state hasn't classified it that way, but it should be. And so if you have them on your property, I hope that you will consider removing them. Buckthorn, it's really, these blackberries are really characteristic of buckthorn. If you have it, you hate it. It's everywhere. The birds will eat the berries and then spread them around. It's a really terrible invasive tree. There are two different kinds. It doesn't matter. If you see these blackberries, it's going to be buckthorn. Bittersweet, that has been taking over recently. This is a vine. These are the seeds or berries, they're not technically berries. These are the seed pods before they open, and they have these beautiful orange seeds in there. People love it, and they make wreaths out of it. They put it on their front porch. Then the birds eat the seeds and they spread them around, or maybe they take the wreath off and they throw it in their compost, and it is just everywhere now. Again, if you have this on your property, now is the time to remove it before those seeds reach maturity and hit the ground and start to grow. Multiflora rose. Oh, Brittany, do you have a question?
A quick little comment about
Yes.
the bittersweet. You do want to be careful with that. The young version of that vine looks different than the adult version. And if you don't get the entire root system out by digging, it will spread significantly faster by a simple cut. So a cut of it will not work,
Yes.
as with most of the invasives, but in particular, the bittersweet spreads significantly faster than most of the other invasives. So you want to be
Yeah.
really careful with that.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. in just a second, I'm going to bring up another one similar to that. So this is multiflora rose. This also has been listed for many years. It has beautiful white flowers, but it's very invasive. And if you like roses, you probably are concerned about the rose rosette disease. And this invasive species often harbors rose rosette and makes your garden roses more at risk of becoming infected. So the other one that we love to hate is tree of heaven. And right now, this is getting a lot of attention because it is the favorite host of the spotted lanternfly, which has now been found in Monroe County and Wayne County. And we are really trying to prevent the spotted lanternfly, which is an invasive insect, from kind of taking over our state. So we do have reports from the East Coast that some birds are adapting to eat the spotted lanternfly, but we really can't count on birds to solve this problem. And tree of heaven is its favorite host. So if you have tree of heaven, please start removing it and bug your local government to remove trees from public property. Again, I'm not going to go into techniques exactly, but this is one, like Brittany said, where if you know the Greek story of the Hydra, where you cut off its head and it just sends out more, this is one of those plants. So cutting it down is not good enough. You need to use an herbicide. So I'm not going to go into all of that. There is an article that came from Michigan State University about how to control tree of heaven and its relationship with spotted lanternfly. So we can put that in the chat. And a new one came out today. It's a resource guide for homeowners and residents of Michigan dealing with tree of heaven. Again, if you have invasive species on your property, right now is probably when they're going to seed. And this is the time, if you can, to start removing them. Tree of heaven might be an exception, as well as the Oriental bittersweet. Again, do your research before you start removing these so that you use the right technique. Sometimes we have to use herbicide. I know a lot of people don't like to, but with these invasive species, sometimes it's the last tool in the toolbox that we have to use. And this is tree of heaven coming up in, the cracks in the sidewalk, just a few houses down from this one in my neighborhood. So this is an herbaceous plant. This is Canada thistle. And if this was in my yard, I would cut off those fluffy seeds and probably put them in a plastic bag and tie that and put it in the trash. Because I don't want those fluffy seeds going around. And then I would probably pull out the rest of the plant. If you're comfortable using herbicide, you might spray it with an herbicide. But Canada thistle spreads by underground roots, and it is extremely hard to get rid of. I would probably say you're never going to, you're only going to manage it, but you don't want it to get more of a stronghold. And this is an example of why I always tell people, friends don't let friends use landscape fabric. You can see the landscape fabric in this picture, and it probably is going to make removing this Canada thistle even harder because the roots are underneath it. You're going to have to pull the whole thing up. Landscape fabric does not prevent weeds from getting a stronghold, especially these invasive species. Okay, so I'm going to go on to something that's more fun. So what do we want to leave behind when we're cleaning up in the garden in the fall? So logs are great to leave behind if you have that option. Dead branches and twigs, and leaves. And so I like this little picture that I found of a sparrow sitting on top of a brush pile. If you've been out birding, you've probably seen different birds using brush piles. I don't have a big enough property to have one, but I wish I did. It's just a big jumble of sticks, but they really provide shelter for invertebrates, birds, and mammals. They're terrific. Insects overwinter in brush piles. Wood-boring insects might eat the material that's breaking down. Spiders create webs between the branches. And then, birds use them for shelter, and they also eat those insects. I was staying at my brother's house and he has, I think, 5 acres, and I was sitting on his deck and I looked out at his brush pile and, I could see a Carolina wren exploring it. And, I kept watching. I could see a sparrow come in and start exploring, or singing at the top of it. They're a really great feature to have. If you can, include one in your yard. However, if you have a problem with rabbits, you probably don't want a brush pile because they are going to love that shelter, that security hiding underneath it. But if you're not so concerned about rabbits, if you got 5 acres like my brother, then you can probably have a brush pile. If you're in a smaller city lot like I am, maybe you have a corner that you don't really use by your compost, and you can do something on a smaller scale. Maybe it's just the cut down debris from your plants. As long as it's not, diseased, you can just make a pile there and leave it. And over time it will break down. Anything, again, it's not perfection. It's just small steps. So leave the leaves is something that we are hearing constantly now. It's a big thing on social media. So yes, if you can, leave the leaves. However, I talked about smothering earlier. Leaves can smother a lawn or garden beds if they're too thick. But you don't have to blow them into the street, which in most municipalities is illegal. And you don't have to necessarily put them in a bag for pickup. There are other options. So this is actually a picture of a chrysalis on the left that's on my siding, and a cocoon that I found elsewhere on the right. And so inside of the leaves are things like this, and there's no way you're going to see a cocoon like the one on the right in those leaves when you're raking them up. And there's hundreds of other invertebrates, or maybe salamanders, spiders, other beneficial insects in those leaves. And if you rake them up and you dispose of all of them, we're going to lose out on things like, a swallowtail butterfly. So please consider leaving the leaves. You can do other things than putting them in bags, like using them as mulch. They're excellent free mulch. I mulch my front yard with all those leaves that come off of that maple tree. And, at this time of year, they're gone. Those leaves have been gone for months now. They've all broken down and disappeared in the beds, in my front garden beds. So yeah, I encourage you to leave them, to rake them around flower beds, to act as mulch. You can also put them around the base of trees, which is really beneficial for trees. So imagine, you've got the roots coming out from the tree, that root flare. Maybe you have some roots that are exposed and annoying for your lawnmower. Cover them up with leaves, smother all that lawn. Then that way you don't have to mow it anymore. You don't have to string trim. That's really, in the long run, better for your trees. And then, of course, it's terrific for the birds and the other invertebrates that use those leaves. So birds don't typically use leaves to make nests, but they do use the little twigs that are mixed in with the leaves. Maybe there's some grasses mixed in as well from your garden, and they'll definitely use those in their nests. So if you have a pristine lawn, a pristine garden, everything is perfectly tidy, there's nothing for birds to use to make their nests. And so you're going to see fewer birds in your yard, or just in general, if everything's perfectly clean. That's not natural. If you do have a really thick layer of leaves from trees, some people do, maybe you can compromise. You put some leaves in your flower beds, you put some around the trees, and then you remove the rest. Again, this is not about perfection. This is just small steps, figuring out what works for you. Yeah, doing what you can at the beginning. If you have a big property, maybe you can put them in a big pile somewhere. If you want to make a garden bed in the future, they could stay in one area and break down and smother the grass, or you use them throughout the season from that pile, adding them to your compost, using them as mulch, or they just become really great leaf mold over time. Oops, I skipped ahead, sorry. Just making sure that I went through all my notes. So yes, if you can, leave the leaves. Okay, now I'm going to move on to some plants for birds. So which fall blooming and fruiting plants attract birds. So it's usually this time of year actually not about flowers. It's about the fruit or the seeds. So I'm going to just touch on some great perennials, grasses, trees, and shrubs that we can plant for birds. This is actually a picture of a coneflower, echinacea, that's been picked over during the winter. And this is what it looked like in the summer. This was taken outside my office last year. So some great plants for our birds. Echinacea purpurea is in this picture. That's the pink flower. Anise hyssop is the purple in the bottom right. And actually, I should say that these are not necessarily native plants. This is a picture of a smart habitat garden. And I really wanted it to be showy because it's outside my office and I wanted it to be beautiful for visitors. And so not everything is native. Echinacea purpurea is not native to Michigan. It's native further west, and same with Echinacea funiculum, or sorry, Agastiche funiculum, that's the anise hyssop. And then let's see, then there's some Monarda in here and some Liatris. That's the other purple flower that's kind of on the left side. And then we have some other more showy annuals mixed in there. But all of these produce seeds for birds in the fall. Actually, the Monarda doesn't, but all the other ones do. And so this is a picture of it in the fall, which I actually happen to like. Some people might see it as, dead. But I would also encourage you to start trying to change your definition of what's beautiful. Browns can be beautiful, and also the fact that these feed the birds and provide homes for insects over the winter is beautiful, I think, in its own way. So the echinacea right now, if you have any in your yard, you probably have goldfinches visiting. I hear them every day in my front yard and my backyard going back and forth as they pick these clean. Once they're done with the echinacea, which is in the center of this picture, they will probably move on to that anise hyssop, which is the brown at the bottom of the picture. And they'll pick the seeds out of the anise hyssop all winter long, and it's fun to watch. And I also like knowing that I'm doing something good by leaving those up. So when speaking of cleaning up the garden, I would really recommend that you don't clean this up. Leave these. Clean up the diseased plants, pull out the weeds, remove the invasive species. But you notice I didn't say to cut things down. And so in the fall, I really don't recommend cutting things down. If you have things that are going to seed too much, maybe you cut off the seed heads. But otherwise, I would leave them. They can be beautiful in the winter with frost on them. I'm just going to go back. You can see a little bit on this. I think this is beautiful in its own way. Like I said, it's feeding birds. They're fun to watch. So if you can adjust your definition of what's beautiful, it makes your life easier and it provides more food for the birds. Another plant that is often maligned, but this is pokeweed, and I think it's absolutely gorgeous with that beautiful purple and those berries. Apparently birds love this. I have actually never seen a bird eating pokeweed in person. I've only ever seen pictures, but I've been told many times that people see birds eating this fruit, and it is a native plant. So it's native to, in North America, it's native up in Michigan. For a lot of people, it's a weed. For me, it's a weed in my garden, but I do see that it has beneficial attributes. So if you have the space for pokeweed, you might want to leave it. Grasses are often overlooked, but they're also important to birds. Again, the leaves in the spring can be used as nesting material. They also provide cover, but seeds, again, this time of year when birds are getting ready to migrate, or over the winter when they really need nutrients, they need fat to survive the harsh winter months in Michigan. They're really key. And they can be, just absolutely gorgeous. This is a mix of grasses with black-eyed Susans or Rudbeckia hirta. And I think it's stunning. It's beautiful. And, over the winter with all the seeds from the Rudbeckia standing up and the seeds from the grass, all of that together with frost on it. It's going to be beautiful and also provide food and shelter. This was a picture, I actually took it in Pennsylvania, probably November, December, something like that. Again, you can see all these different grasses mixed in together, and they just have these beautiful, different contrasting textures and colors. I highly encourage you to plant more. I took this recently on a Detroit Bird Alliance field trip. I love the grasses can be pretty when they're blooming too. This has this great yellow pollen hanging down. It's really beautiful and decorative when you look up close. Take the time to look closely. And then, of course, in the winter, it's going to provide seeds again. So some trees and shrubs I want to talk about. This is staghorn sumac. Right now you're going to see it along the side of the roads. It's a native plant. It's really wonderful. And you'll see birds eating the fruit. This is the fruit. Those are all individual little, I'm not sure if they're berries, but they're individual little fruits all in this cone. So you'll see it right now. It's beautiful, these big cones and that kind of stag. Like it kind of looks like antlers in a way when you see this plant growing. But it's beautiful, it's showy, and then also it feeds the birds. So this is actually the right time to be planting these plants, perennials, grasses, trees, shrubs. A lot of them like to be planted now. And incidentally, this is not the time of year most people are thinking about gardening, so things start to go on sale. So keep an eye out. But planting now through October is ideal as the temperatures get cooler, we get more rain, it's less stressful on plants that you're putting in. However, if you plant now, don't forget to water. It's been very dry, and trees and shrubs, things like that, really do need water through the fall to get established. So just don't forget to do that. I will share in a bit. I'll put links in the chat, I think, near the end. Treesaregood.org is a great site if you want to learn more about trees. That's from the International Society of Arboriculture, and they have a lot of information on how to select a good tree and then how to plant it, because most people actually do not know how to properly plant a tree. So I want everybody to know how to properly plant a tree, and they've got great handouts and diagrams and stuff like that on their website. Gray dogwood. So I took these pictures, by the way, right by my office in Wayne. Gray dogwood's a native plant. It has this fruit on it. Birds love this fruit, and it's actually good for them. When they did studies at MSU of they looked at fecal samples of birds to see what they were eating, and gray dogwood was one of their favorites. And it's, it has these beautiful berries. It's a no-care plant. It does sucker, so you probably don't want it in a small yard unless you're ready to put in some maintenance and dig out the plants as it tries to spread. This is just kind of a random wild, so to speak, crabapple that was, by the parking lot at my office, but beautiful. And birds do love to eat crabapples. I've seen turkeys in crabapple trees. I see robins in crabapple trees in the winter. They are good food for birds. They're not necessarily native, and I think that's okay. They are not invasive at this point in time. This is a picture of Lindera benzoin. That is another native tree. It blooms really early in the spring. It has these beautiful yellow flowers. And then in the fall, I'm sorry that this picture is blurry, but you can see that it has bright yellow leaves and this beautiful red fruit. And apparently it is one of the most favored foods for birds in the fall. Part of that MSU study when they looked at fecal samples, this was like the #1 berry that or fruit that the birds were eating. So if you have space for it, I would include it. And I said at the beginning, I mentioned how things are interconnected, right? We're not gardening in a vacuum. So Lindera is one of those plants where if you have a gardening friend nearby, a neighbor, you might want to work with them, because if I remember correctly, it has male plants and it has female plants. So if you plant a female plant, there's no male plant anywhere nearby, you're not going to get fruit. You need both. So sometimes if you have a friend that can plant one and you plant the other, if you have small lots, like in my space, I'd love to have a neighbor who could plant the male and I have the female and I get the fruit, and I benefit. But anyway, so maybe you can work together. And hollies are another one that often have male and female plants. Our native holly, Ilex verticillata or winterberry, is again very attractive to birds, but you need a male plant and a female plant. So remember that if you're going to a nursery to buy things, again, do some research beforehand so that you make sure that you get the right plant, or if you need to, that you get two and that you get a male and a female. Oak trees are another resource for birds. They are one of the most important trees in our environment because they are host to so many different caterpillars. And in the spring, birds need caterpillars to feed their babies. It's the #1 food for, young birds. Most baby birds cannot eat seeds. They're eating insects, and that includes caterpillars, brought to the nest by their parents. So we need native plants that are host to native insects, and oak trees are one of those. And then in the fall, they provide acorns, and birds like woodpeckers and blue jays, they love acorns. So they're a great tree all around. If you have the space, plant an oak tree. These are red oak acorns, and right now I would caution people about planting red oaks. You might look into a white oak because of oak wilt. That is a disease that we're trying to better understand. So if you want a tree that's going to live a long time, maybe go towards a white oak as opposed to a red oak at this point in time. Don't forget vines. These are, so on the bottom with those red stems, that's Virginia creeper. And you can see it has beautiful blue or purple kind of berries attached to those red stems. It's absolutely gorgeous right now out there. And then at the top with that yellow leaf is a native grape. We have a lot of native grapes. And again, these are really attractive to birds. That right now they need this fruit to feed them so that they can put on fat so they can migrate or make it through our winter. So don't forget about vines as well. So yeah, fall is for planting. Please don't forget to plant this fall. It's often less stressful for the plants. So go right ahead and get started. I also wanted to talk about winter sowing because a lot of our native plants need a cold period. And sometimes people don't realize that. So they need it. A chilling requirement of a certain number of months below a certain temperature for them to be able to germinate. So when you're buying seeds, check the germination requirements before you purchase the seeds, because you might find out that you can't meet those requirements, or you might find out that you don't have the patience. There are some native plants that need 2 winters before they will germinate. And you can either fake that in your refrigerator, or you can do it outside, but that requires a lot of commitment. And maybe you don't want to do that. Maybe you just want to buy the plants from a local nursery. So please check the germination requirements beforehand. And then I said, beware of wildflowers. And that's because wildflowers is kind of a term. It's a very loose term, and it's often non-native plants. They're beautiful, like cornflowers and poppies and things like that. They're beautiful plants, but they're not native. So if you want native plants, beware of wildflowers and look for seeds that say native, and then find out if they're native to Michigan. And then native is one of those terms that I often tell people you need to define on your own. Is it native to North America? Is it native to the Great Lakes region? Is it native to Michigan? Is it native to your county? Like what is your definition? So really look into that and think about how you want to define native. I would recommend looking more towards Michigan because of our climate and our soils. And then, of course, the UP, though, is going to be very different from where I am in Wayne County. So again, think about what's native to where you live and how it works with the soils and the weather and things like that. So right now is the time to start buying native seeds and sowing them in preparation for the winter. So these are a few native flowers that I would recommend sowing in the fall so that they have that winter chill time. The native columbine is the one that's on the left, and it blooms right in time for the hummingbirds to come back. So it's a wonderful choice to have in your garden. Rudbeckia hirta is the black-eyed Susan in the bottom right. And then Jack in the Pulpit is that interesting looking red fruit in the upper right. And that's not necessarily something, the plant isn't going to attract the birds, but birds do eat this fruit in the fall. So if you like those, now is the time to start planting them. I should say about Jack in the Pulpit, though, that there is an extremely invasive plant that looks similar to it if you're just looking at this fruit. And so make sure you are not getting the invasive, it's called Arum italicum. Make sure you have Jack in the Pulpit instead. This is a picture of that Anise hyssop or Agastache funiculum that I showed much earlier. It is a purple flower, and I said that the goldfinches love it. And you can see how tiny those seeds are coming out of the inflorescence at the top of my hand. So I was just shaking it and they're coming out. But you can see why the birds love it. It has a ton of seeds, and those seeds provide fat and nutrients to them. So I wanted to show you just kind of an example of how you can sow seeds for the winter. This is just a cheap lasagna pan with some potting media in it. Don't forget to label it. Number one, don't forget to label your plants. You will not remember what seeds you put down by March. I would also recommend that if you are not familiar with these plants, to sow them in a container as opposed to throwing them on the ground. Because if you're not familiar with these plants, you're not going to know what they are when they come up, and you're not going to know the difference between a weed and your native plant. So if you're throwing the seeds on the ground. If you can start them in something, a container, a pot, milk jugs are really popular. That's the best way to go, because then you'll get to know what the seedlings look like as they come up. So again, don't forget to label it, and don't forget to have drainage holes in the bottom. You know, a lasagna pan, if you were to put that out in the winter, it's going to completely flood with water and freeze and probably kill your seeds. So you want to poke holes in the bottom so that it can drain. And then don't forget to protect it from the squirrels. I have so many squirrels and they dig up everything. This is a bulb crate that I just turned over the top. You could also use hardware cloth and cut a piece and put it over the top and weigh it down with bricks, something like that. An old screen, window screen, put it over the top, hold it down with bricks so that the squirrels don't get in, but you do need to protect it from animals and birds. And then I'm going to jump ahead to spring cleanup. So I told you to weed, to remove the seeds, to leave the leaves and things like that, and leave the sticks and everything if you can until spring. And so then what do you do in spring? So when spring comes, you're going to pull back the leaves from the bulbs and plant crowns so that they're not smothered. If anything's covered, you're going to go out there and you're going to look and you're going to see them coming up and pull those leaves away. And at that point, you can start cutting down dead stems. And if you need to apply mulch, only apply a small amount, probably 1 to 2 inches. And so why is this? It's because spring is the time when insects are starting to come out of the ground, come out of the plant debris. And so people say, when should I do it? You know, what's the day? What's the month? And there really isn't a specific answer. One of my colleagues, Dr. Nate Walton at MSU, wrote a great article that I'll share about spring cleanup. And he published it this spring. And he basically said it totally depends upon the individual insect, kind of what the timing is. Some people will say it's when the air temperature reaches 50 degrees. I would argue that it's probably better if the soil temperature is above 50 degrees. And that's when you start to see things really coming out. But there are insects that stay underground or stay hidden away in plant debris, and they come out much later in summer than what we would ever think. And so it really just depends upon what insects you're trying to work with. So I would say if you can wait. If you don't need to clean up at all because your neighbors aren't going to be mad at you, you can just leave it. That's nature. And it'll slowly break down over time. But if you do need to clean up, use manual methods like a rake and your hands, and just work really slowly so that things have time to run away. If you can avoid using a leaf blower, please do. And if you can avoid mowing over leaves with a lawnmower, please do. Again, if you use manual methods of cleaning up, things can fly away or they can run away. So you're a lot less likely to kill insects. You can use growing degree days to help predict when beneficial insects come out, and MSU is a growing degree day tracker, but there's not a lot of research on when our native insects actually come out. So that's all stuff that needs to be done. So it's really dependent. You're just kind of doing your best. And if you wait too long, of course, then if you wait too long to clean up, then things start moving in, right? So you're just doing your best. I wanted to show this picture of, this is my front yard, and I believe this was April 14th of this year. And you can see all those maple leaves down as mulch, and you can just see the plants starting to come up through it. Not all of these are native. It's a mix. It looks like I still have some asters standing. And then this is 3 weeks later. So you can see how fast things change in 3 weeks. So I was lucky and that I probably cleaned it up, just cutting down those asters, pulling some leaves away from the crowns of the plants. I could see the peonies are kind of what's red in this picture that's coming up. So I wanted to let those go. And, if I'd waited any longer, I would have been stepping on these plants and crushing them as they came up and started blooming. So it is kind of a timing thing. If you have a formal gardener, this is obviously on a sidewalk, and I need my neighbors to not hate me for having a messy native garden. Probably around April, early April is when you're going to start cleaning up. If you can avoid tilling or deep digging, that's also great because a lot of our insects and our solitary bees are underground. Again, doing as little as you possibly can is the best way to go. And leaving it for the birds. And the bees and the birds right now, at this time of year would be probably coming through and picking up those grasses and things like that and using them for their nests. So that is the end of my presentation. I am going to make a plug for our Gardening in Michigan Facebook page. If you use Facebook, you can follow us there and get more information as we post it. And then if you're new to gardening or you're a longtime gardener, our Foundations of Gardening class, we do it twice a year. It's the start if you're interested in becoming a master gardener, and it'll run again in February. And that's the end of my slideshow. So I'm going to stop sharing and go to Brittany and take any questions that people have.
So, one of the questions, so I was trying to answer some of them while you were speaking, if I was able to. One was Stephanie was wanting to see if you could share a link to the new homeowner guide for Tree of Heaven.
Yes. I'm going to, so I'm going to, you're going to see me looking at my screen and looking around because I am looking for that link. But Brittany, keep talking and I will put that in the chat.
Yeah, so I'll go back and I'll read those questions that people posed earlier, and I'll read what I answered, which Lindsey, feel free to chime in beyond what I wrote if you want to expand upon my answer, or correct me if you disagree. So someone said, hi, or no, what was the bush that you said was the junk food for birds? So I had said it wasn't a specific bush that was mentioned at the beginning because you hadn't gotten into the invasive species list yet. I put she was referring to invasive plants that pollinators depend on, which can be like eating junk food for birds.
Okay, so I just put the link in the chat for Tree of Heaven. Um, so yeah, the junk food for birds, what I meant is that these invasive species, particularly shrubs that have berries this time of year, those are what we consider junk food for birds. So those include uh Lonicera species. That's pretty much all of our honeysuckle. So even that honeysuckle vine that, you know, your grandma grew on the fence, and I absolutely love the smell of honeysuckle, they're all invasive. There is one vine that has a very trumpet-shaped flower that's a native to North America honeysuckle, but pretty much everything else is unfortunately at this point invasive. And then, but also I said buckthorn as well. Um, uh, I don't actually know about the multiflora rose. I don't know if that would be considered junk food because there are roses that are native to North America. And so when they did that study at MSU, they really were looking at the different honeysuckles and buckthorn and some other invasive shrubs. So that's kind of what I was referring to. Um, I wish I had that uh the link to that study right now, but I could bring it up. I'm also going to put in the chat an article about spring cleanup that I referenced. That's really great that Nate Walton wrote and published this spring.
Awesome. So the next question, which I also answered, which it says, do you mean removing the whole peonies from the tubers or just the above ground parts? I said she was referring to cutting back the diseased sections of the peonies and moving them away from your garden to reduce the chances of the disease spreading.
Yes. So yes, I don't mean the tubers. I mean just the leaves, just the above ground part. And then somebody, okay, so I'm seeing why is it okay to put diseased peony leaves in the city compost? So city compost, if they're doing it properly, it should get really hot. It's like an industrial composting process. It's much more high tech than what we do in our backyards. So, and then it's also sitting for many more months. Well, it's one or the other probably. It's getting to a very high temperature and killing weed seeds and then also diseases. Ideally, that's the case. Because otherwise, yeah, we would be spreading diseases throughout our whenever we get compost from city facilities. I discourage people from putting invasive species, the seeds in particular, into city compost because sometimes it doesn't get hot enough to kill them. I used to live in Oregon and I asked about putting English ivy into the compost, and they told me not to because they cannot kill the seeds of English ivy. They bring it up to a certain temperature and they hold it there for months at above, I think it's like 160 degrees, and that still doesn't kill the English ivy seeds. And in the Pacific Northwest, that is a terrible, like, just scourge on the environment is English ivy. So anyway, please don't put seeds from invasive species in the compost. If it is classified as invasive in Michigan, you should be able to put it in the trash. They don't want you putting huge plants in the trash. Again, it should be small amounts like the seeds that you've clipped off or berries, and you want it in a bag and it's tied and it goes in the trash. But yeah, you're not putting the whole shrub in because the branches of, say, a honeysuckle are not going to spread. It's only the fruit.
So one of the other questions I answered earlier was if we have some seeds that did not get planted this year, how do we keep them through the winter to plant next year? I had said it depends on the species of seed. What I've done is put them in my freezer until around November or any time in the early spring. Then I plant them in my garden. Um, and if our winter doesn't get cold enough for long enough, they may not bloom in the spring. It can also take a couple years for seeds to start blooming, which there's each species of seed is going to be different, but feel free to expand on that, Lindsay.
Yeah, so if you have seeds that you didn't plant this year, most likely they're going to be okay for next year. There are some vegetable seeds and there are some flower seeds that just don't last. They're not programmed, so to speak, to do that. Like lettuce, they just do not, from one year to the next, their germination rate just goes down like crazy. But other things like tomatoes will last for a long time. Um, so yeah, keep them in a cool, dry place and then try them again next year. On the other hand, if it is a native plant and it needs that cold period, it's probably about time for you to either plant them so they're outside over the winter, or you're putting them in your refrigerator now so that they have that, it's a false winter, I guess, in your refrigerator. Putting them in the refrigerator, though, just in their packet might not be good enough. It might need a moist stratification where you might use like a paper towel with the seeds or something like that. So again, you want to look all of this up. It's all very particular for each plant. I wish I could just, give a blanket statement, but it's never that easy when it comes to gardening. If you're working with native plants, I'm not endorsing this company, but Prairie Moon, they have really great instructions on germinating native seeds. So if you got a packet of seeds from, say, a friend or at a plant exchange, like I have one on my desk right now for swamp milkweed. And if I didn't know how to germinate these, I could go to Prairie Moon's website, look up swamp milkweed, read how to do it, and then, do it in my own backyard.
So, someone made a comment. It wasn't necessarily a question, but they said Tollgate Farms has a plant sale this Saturday from 9 to noon. It's also, they'd also suggest a columnar oak variety. They mentioned something about a children's garden and that it doesn't spread in a large way, so it doesn't get it
Yeah.
to be a very big plant.
So Tollgate, if people aren't familiar, Tollgate is a Michigan State University property. It's in Novi. It's right by 12 Oaks Mall. It's kind of, a lot of people don't know that it's there, and it's a great resource. You can go hiking. Like she said, I shouldn't assume it's a she. This person said that they have a plant sale going on. There are goats. I see turkeys there. I see sandhill cranes flying overhead. So take a minute to go visit that if you have time. And if you happen to be there at a plant sale, that's terrific. And so they do have a children's garden. So my understanding is that they have a columnar variety of oak. So if you're thinking of planting an oak tree and you have a small space, you could go see what a columnar variety of oak would look like in your own yard. And that's actually a really great thing to do, is just go to public gardens and see what plants look like at a public garden, like the Adolph Garden on Belle Isle, or some of the gardens that the Detroit Bird Alliance maintains, like Callahan Park. Go there and see how big the plants get, right? Sometimes these native plants get really tall. And, it's really good to learn that before you plant it next to the sidewalk in your front yard.
Another
So,
great place that I would recommend, it was actually planted by SEMBA, Southeast Michigan Butterfly Association. It's Corrado Park in Westland, and they have a
yes,
beautiful pollinator garden there that they have such a nice variety of flowers and plants that they manage. And some of them are species that you might say like ironweed that people, it sounds pretty, it's a beautiful color, but it gets a lot taller than most people realize. And some of the plants there get a really, really tall height. And so it gives you that concept of just how big some of them get and where
right.
you might want to plant them.
Yes, and incidentally, that garden, it's called Three Bees, and that it was founded by a master gardener, and she still maintains it, and a bunch of master gardeners help out there. But yeah, that's a great example. And I also would like to say that a lot of our native plants, when they're put into our home gardens, they often get more water and more nutrients than they would in the wild. And so they grow bigger and taller. So I always tell people native plants don't need fertilizer. They shouldn't need supplemental water unless we're having a terrible drought. I mean, maybe when they're getting established, you're going to water it. But, year 2, year 3, you probably don't need to water. And that's the beauty of it. They're lower maintenance because they're adapted to our local climate and soils.
I had someone,
But
I had a master gardener describe herself as a lazy gardener
yes,
when
yeah.
it comes to natives.
Well, and that's the thing is that, I'm hoping that through this talk and other talks that we give, that people realize that you can't be a lazy gardener. We're always going to be battling those invasive species. That's probably the biggest frustration for us. But if you have the right plant in the right place, you have to do less work. And so oftentimes native plants can fill that niche. And then they also, again, they support our native insects, which then support our birds. And so it's all, again, interconnected. Somebody else recommended Rouge Park in Detroit. And yes, that is where I took a picture of grass. The grass with the yellow pollen hanging down was at the Rouge Park Detroit Bird Alliance field trip recently. That prairie section that they've restored is a really great place to walk and see native plants and birds and butterflies.
Someone in
Somebody,
the
sorry,
Oh,
go ahead.
I was gonna say someone asked for you to send the links in an email. So Lori or Lindsay, if you'd like to send me those
Yeah,
links, I can email them. Lori was asking. And
yes,
then
yeah. And
another
then,
person said, are there resources to help remove invasive Oriental bittersweet?
so unfortunately, I'm going to guess no. There, if they mean money or help, I guess. And unfortunately, at least in our state, the state doesn't support removal of invasive species on private property, and I don't know of any municipalities that do that as well. And of course, it's a funding issue, right? We just don't have the money to put behind this. I would really hope to see that with Tree of Heaven, because we now know the link between Tree of Heaven and spotted lanternfly. But I think cities would probably have to vote in a millage to pay for those kind of things, and most people don't want to see their taxes go up. Um, so yeah, it's a tough situation. For bittersweet, I will send a link to information about Tree of Heaven removal, and I would think that bittersweet is very much the same. Um, Oftentimes it's this time of year when the trees have put or vines have put all of their energy into growing this season, and they put their energy into making berries or fruit or seeds, whatever you want to call it. So they've expended so much energy that if you cut them now and you paint them with an herbicide, they are at their weakest point right now. And they're also storing their energy for the winter. So they're going to take that herbicide down into their roots, and it's the most likely time for you to be able to kill them with an herbicide. You can also, if you are against herbicides, you could cut it down and cover it with, say, black plastic so that they get no light at that trunk. But again, all those roots that you can't see that are reaching out through your lawn and things like that are probably going to put up sprouts. And then you can mow those off over and over and over again, but it's going to take years to deplete them. And you just know that going in, and that you're not doing anything wrong. It's just that it's constant maintenance until you finally wear out the plant and it finally, runs out of energy and dies. So
And she elaborated a little bit more. So Sue says she is looking for services because she does not, she says, realizing I may need to pay just too much for me to tackle by myself. So I know that there's at least one company. I believe they were bought out, but they used to be called Cardno. So Cardno, but I believe they were purchased by a different company, but I believe they still do services like that. Usually I think in larger scales, but I'd say you could look into them a little bit, but I will expand a little bit on what Lindsay said when it comes to managing Oriental bittersweet. I have done that work in the past. I agree that managing them in the fall / over the winter is the best time for woody invasives. You want to do a double cut when it comes to the Oriental bittersweet vine, because if you just cut it and treat the stump, the top part will reroot into the ground. So you want to make sure you do a double cut. So you cut right above the ground and you treat it as Lindsay mentioned, but you want to cut that second part up about 2 feet off the ground and just throw out that piece you cut out, because otherwise that top part will reroot. You want to avoid pulling, if it's a larger one, you don't want to pull it down because those vines sometimes will tear down the trees. You want to let it die on its own. If it's a small one, yeah, you can cut off the fruit, but oftentimes they're up too high for you to be able to properly cut the fruit out. Your best chance to manage it is get it young, do that double cut, and hope that you kill it, and just keep an eye on it.
So I just put in the chat a link to Trees Are Good. That's again a great resource for information about trees and also how to find a certified arborist, which a certified arborist might be able to help with some of this stuff. It depends upon, you know, what services they offer, but I can't recommend anybody by name. You know, since I'm a public employee, I can't do that. So yeah. One thing I will say, Sue, is that I would love, and I'm hoping I can do that next year, is create a class, a short course or workshop about invasive species removal. So invasive species ID, and then actually going out and doing hands-on at maybe a local park. So you can see the tools that we use and talk about herbicides and safety and actually see it applied so that you can take that home. And then, of course, if we can do this workshop, people will learn, and then maybe they'll be able to help their neighbors and things like that, and help their neighborhoods. In Detroit, you know, the alleyways were abandoned for years and they're full of tree of heaven. So this is really something that's needed. So I hope we can provide that, at least the knowledge in the future.